So turn your screen share off.
Yeah, thank you.
Melanie Mary Pat is in Ghana.
So text me anybody that's not on. I pretty much can see who is on. I can see who is on. So
Okay, y'all, we are live.
good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Melanie Campbell. I'm the president and CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation and convener of the Black Women's Roundtable. It is a pleasure this morning to join our sisters and brothers who we partnered with to conduct a exit poll, election day exit poll for the Georgia Senate runoff. So we had a national poll that we released, but Georgia gave us one more opportunity to find out what made Black folks show up and show out at the polls in Georgia. What were the issues of concern as they walked to the ballot box? I want to thank Roland Martin Unfiltered, our media partner, and thank our state affiliates and partners from Georgia, Georgia Stand Up, Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda, HBCU Green Fund, Georgia Black Women's Roundtable, Georgia Black Youth Vote, who conducted the poll on the ground in the midst of all that was going on in Georgia to help us find out. And we're going to release the results of that and then also have a conversation about what all that means and where do we go from here. Elections have come and gone, and Georgia has been the epicenter of saving democracy for at least these last two major election cycles. And so we hear from our leaders from an intergenerational panel to talk about what this poll means and how we leverage that and what's next. So we're going to turn it over to Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver, who is the founder and president of Insight Unlimited. She's an author, a researcher, and thank her so very much. We can call on her on a dime, and I'm gonna stop trying to use that dime so much, but I appreciate you for helping us to do the analysis of the data, and I'll call on and thank our state partners and national partners as well, who are also joining us, who could help participate in that as well with through the voter protection and legal group. So Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver, we'll turn it over to you to give us the results.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And I just have to say, Mel, with all that you do for the Black community, you can ask for a mountain of dimes and they will always be given. Okay. Awesome. So if we can share the slides and bring those slides up, we can get going on these results.
So as we're waiting to work through the technology, I will go ahead and also thank our state and national partners who are joining us today. I see Deborah Scott, CEO from Georgia Stand Up, and I see Helen Butler from Executive Director for Georgia Coalition for the People's Agenda on this call, and now I can't see who else on here. And I don't think Felicia is on yet. And then we'll introduce those. I'm here. Oh, okay, good. So Felicia Davis, Executive Director of the HBCU Green Fund in Clayton County, Georgia, Black Women's Roundtable. I didn't catch, I'm so sorry.
It's
Deborah.
Liv Duncan.
Thank you. With Georgia Stand Up, Black Youth Vote, and then our brother from Y Block. Didn't I see?
Abdul Dasinmu.
Hey, Abdul, I'm sorry. Long night last night. So apologize for that. Thank you for being on. So we try to figure out this technology. Do we need to do something?
We might need to change the presenter since the panel that's being shared is currently streaming a share, and it seems like the panelists may not be able to view it.
Right. So if I can have sharing privileges, I can pull it up on my end.
You should have that now, Dr. Avis.
All right. So-
Okay, first that share needs to be discontinued before I can pull mine up. Thank you.
Yes.
All righty. Okay.
We're good.
All right.
We're in business. Turn it over to you, Avis.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. And I just want to say congratulations to each and everybody on this call and many of you out here who are listening who did the hard work that resulted in, once again, saving this nation from disaster with regards to all of the work that you did with getting out a very robust vote in the runoff elections. This exit poll was done among Georgian voters to really get a sense of what was in their minds on that very crucial decision day. And so I'm excited to be able to share this analysis with you. Now, first of all, we see that in terms of the runoff, almost everyone, the overwhelming majority of folks, actually, I think it really what actually should have been the other way. I know this is wrong. I'm sorry. I don't want to apologize because now that I'm seeing this first time voting, this actually was not their first time voting. For the overwhelming majority of people, 96%, it was actually not their first time voting. Only 4% of the voters there indicated that it was their first time voting. So this was a turnout of people who had voted before, and I would say probably a number of them had voted just a few weeks ago in the midterm election. In terms of how they would rate their voting experience, we see here that over 3/4 said that they would rate it in a very positive manner. Literally 0 people said they had very negative or negative experiences. And if you saw our results from a couple of weeks ago when we shared the exit polls from the midterm election, though there were a very small number of people who said they had very negative or negative votes, there were some people who said that. So what's interesting to me is that that number has actually gone down and completely evaporated. And so in terms of this voter experience, in spite of all the obstacles that were put up, in spite of all the challenges that I know people must have faced in order to get out there a second time so closely after the general election, it seems like there was a bit of enthusiasm here because, as was mentioned, over 3/4 not only said it was a positive experience, they said it was a very positive experience. In terms of when they voted, the overwhelming majority voted actually on election day. Nearly 3/4 indicated they voted on election day, but a little over 1/4 actually did vote early. And so that still, I believe, was a very, very important strategy for making sure that people had their voices heard. And so I know there was a lot of effort put into making sure that people utilize their opportunity to vote early. And I think with the 27% early vote rate, that shows that that effort was not for naught. It was very effective. We did ask if you cast a regular ballot or a provisional ballot in this election. And once again, the overwhelming majority cast a regular ballot in this election, just under 90%. Only about 4% indicated that they voted a provisional ballot via provisional ballot. The rest indicated that they did not know or they didn't answer the question at all. So did you have to show your ID? Almost everyone did have to show their ID in order to vote. 99% indicated yes, they did. Only 1% said that they did not. In terms of indicating whether or not they experienced voter problems, almost the overwhelming majority, over 3/4, once again, 80% said that they experienced no problem at all. Among those who experienced voter problems, I would say most would describe that as being asked to show their ID, which only about 10% indicated that that was the case. Now, there was a question that asked, why did you vote in this election? And this is a question that I know is a longstanding question in the exit polls that NCBCP participates in. And, you know, the overwhelming, I would say the majority, a slight majority said, because they see it as their responsibility. So this issue of a responsibility voter is very true when it comes to the Black community. I believe, you know, Black people understand all that we went through, blood, literally, sweat and tears that led to this right. And a slight majority of people see it specifically as their responsibility to act on that right. But 13% indicated that they were most motivated to vote because they wanted to vote for a particular candidate, and the desire to vote for a candidate over 3 times outweighed the desire to vote against a candidate, which I thought was a very interesting finding right there. And in terms of who they voted for, and in specifically their policy reasons why they voted for that candidate, when asked, you know, did you vote for what issues did you vote for that candidate for? Like, and most people said, I voted for the candidate who committed to addressing the following issues. The top issues for these voters were protecting voting rights, followed by protecting reproductive rights, followed by reducing structural racism. Those were really clustered right up there at the top, along with reducing inflation and issues of policing, criminal justice reform. Also important to these voters were protecting LGBTQ rights, as well as protecting the safety net. So these were the key issues that these voters were looking for a candidate who would address. And for the candidate that they believe would address these issues, that was the particular candidate that won their vote. Now, we also asked what were their top 3 issues that they believe were facing the Black community. And the respondents had an array of 14 different issues that they could choose from. And these were the issues that rose to the top. The top issue that voters indicated that they thought impacted the Black community was rise in hate crimes, rise in racism, and rise in hate crimes. 37% of those who responded mentioned that. That was most likely to be their first choice. In terms of the answer that was most likely to be the second choice, that was affordable healthcare. So even though we've made progress with regards to access to healthcare in this country, there's still a desire to have more affordable healthcare, and that was something that really resonated with this community. In terms of the third most likely answer that people gave with regards to top issues facing the Black community, protecting reproductive rights. With all the attacks that's happened in terms of turning over Roe, people saw that as a driver for getting out to vote. So these were the top 3 issues that these respondents said that they believed impacted the Black community. Now, similarly, they were asked, what are the top 3 issues that threaten you or your family? So a slight nuance here, not just asking what they thought impacted the Black community writ large. They wanted to really get personal with this question, right? What are the top 3 issues that are threatening you and your family? Now, we see some different things on this chart. Here, over a third said that inflation and the cost of living is the top issue threatening their family or threatening themselves. In terms of those issues that were rated at the top, next was rise in hate crimes and racism. Over a quarter said that, and nearly a quarter said the cost of housing. For those who ranked their second most threatening issue for themselves or their family, once again, inflation, cost of living was the second most cited challenge that they said they were facing, with well over a quarter of respondents indicating that. Some 24% said the high cost of housing was the second most important issue, and 12% said racism and rise in hate crimes. In terms of that third most important issue impacting their families, here is where you saw racism take the lead as the third most likely cited reason, followed by the high cost of housing, and followed by inflation and cost of living. So these were the key issues that were most important to those voters in terms of issues that they felt impacted them personally. Just in terms of sharing some information on the demographics of these voters, it's a little hard to read here, but I would say that overwhelmingly, the majority of the voters that were there, I think was around 26%, were in the 25 to 34 age grouping. So pretty young adults here. The youth, though, had a good representation too. It was roughly around 7.1% of those who were there. In terms of the those who are in their middle age years, I would say almost approaching at least 35 to 44s. There we had about 20%, followed by those that were 45 to 64. And interestingly, you had the 65 plus following only second in the level of representation, second to last in the level of representation with regards to the age groupings. In terms of gender, you did have more women that responded to the exit poll than men. About 43% of the respondents here were women compared to only a little over a quarter of men. And in terms of, here's the correct age where we can see it there. It looks like there was an extra slide in there. So you can see it better there in terms of the age demographics. In terms of education, we see that the majority of the people who answered that question, the plurality of them said that they had some college. So just a little bit over a quarter, followed by college grads were 24%, 13% had a postgraduate education, 8% said that they had a high school graduation. Less than 1% said they had less than a high school education. With regards to the income range of those who responded here, we saw that 24% made somewhere between $25,000 to just under $50,000 a year, followed by those who made $50,000 to just under $100,000 a year. So about half the sample ranged somewhere in that space between 25 and just under 100,000 a year. The next largest grouping of representation was those who made under 25,000, which was about 17% of the respondents. And in terms of employment, we see that 44% were employed full-time, with just 5% employed part-time and 8% self-employed. The rest were either unemployed, retired, or students. Did not have, in this particular sample, a percentage that was more than 1% that were representative of the military. And with that, I will stop and turn it over to Melanie.
Thank you, Avis. I have a follow-up question for you, and then ask Angelo if there's any media on that have a question for Avis. When Avis, we conducted the exit poll, the national poll, and one of the things that I saw that stood out was that in Georgia specifically, compared to the national poll, when you ask that question about on that personal level, that you saw more economic issues that impacted your daily life. So I don't know if you had a chance to kind of think through that, what you think may, and I'm definitely going to let our leaders from Georgia to really ask. I'm going to ask you that question as part of our roundtable. What does that mean? You know, and in real life, what does that mean, and what's happening in Georgia? You think that those numbers came up? You talk about inflation and cost of living and affordable housing.
Absolutely.
And then just any thoughts about that, and then Angelo, if there's anyone or Q who are monitoring, if anyone has any questions from the media.
Yeah, that was a very interesting finding. It did seem like the specific Georgian respondents were feeling a little bit more economically fragile than the respondents overall when we did the broader exit poll analysis. And so that's telling me something about what's going on in the Georgian economy, and it's telling me something about what's going on with housing prices in Georgia, maybe compared to other parts of the nation. It's really telling me something about how this, southern space is probably having prices that don't feel very Southern. We oftentimes think of Southern as being more affordable pricing for housing and all these other things. Well, in many ways, Georgia has matured in recent years into being very much a very, very, I would say in many respects, up and coming area. I almost call it specifically Atlanta. It's like the Hollywood of the South, right? And so there are a lot of price escalations apparently that are going along with that it seems have creeped outside of Atlanta and probably have hit Georgians, broadly speaking, making ends meet a little bit more difficult these days.
Thank you, Avis, for that. And we're going to continue that conversation in our roundtable. Do we have any questions from the media? I know we have some on. Can't hear you.
It looks like no one has raised their hand for a
Questions?
question.
Okay, so what we'll do is if you want to get the hard copy of the results, the digital copy, you can go to unitycampaign.org and Q, if you could put that in the chat, that would be great. And we thank you for joining us and getting this insight. So I'm going to continue the conversation. Dr. Avis, if you want to stay on and join the conversation, I know we thank you for taking the lead on analyzing this data for, as you always do, help us create the instrument over the years. And we appreciate your leadership and expertise. So hang on if you want to join. So I'm going to jump right into it. I just asked Avis that question. And so I'm going to ask our panel from Georgia, specifically, to give us your feedback on what you just heard and give us some practical, what does it mean? And whoever from Georgia would like to start and give us your feedback about what you think about the poll and what you're seeing and know what people are living through when it comes to issues that what made them show up. One more time in Georgia. And as she said, 96% of the folks who responded voted in the general, and it came back the second time for the 2022 election. So who would like to start?
So Melanie, this is Felicia, and of course, we're primarily in Clayton County, which is very much a working class, low to moderate income county, with a lot of the exodus out of Atlanta has come into Clayton for affordability. And now prices, whether it's homes or rental properties, are many places they've gone up 10 and 20%. In the Atlanta metro area, we're talking double, triple, quadruple. And so it's putting extreme pressure on families from the housing perspective. And then on top of that, you have the inflation in all the other areas. For people that are well situated, it's like my home, my personal home value, and they tell me is triple. Nothing more has changed, but so there's that. In terms of on the ground, what we saw, I think a lot of people were surprised at the outcome from the general. And that created a kind of momentum to go back out. I don't think people expected the outcome in Georgia. Is strange because the winner doesn't take all in the general. We have that 50+1. And so the person that ultimately won also, if it were any other state, would have won in the general. So people seem to have been surprised by the outcome and the need to go again. And I think Deborah, Helen, the rest of us, that let's do it again feeling held over from 2020. So because it was the same candidate that won, and having gone through this once before, that created on the ground a kind of momentum that the Black community in particular was determined to do it again.
Thank you. Who's next? Thanks, Felicia. Okay, I'll call on you. Don't want to go.
Well, I think Felicia gave a good analysis. I want to say for the young people, they were extra motivated to get out, and I'm sure Liv will tell us all about that. But the one thing that I saw in the first slide about overall, about racism, and of course, about protecting voting rights. So that the candidate would address those issues is what motivated them to be engaged. I think a lot of the changes with SB 202, people understood why it was important to do what they had to do, why they had to show up, but it was all impacted, and they thought it was perhaps a racist thing that was put in place just to put certain demographics from voting. But in terms of the financial issues, if you look at the rural areas, hospitals are closed throughout the state. So therefore, your health care would be an issue that would be important to them. And Felicia has enunciated the other parts about poverty and housing and not having enough. I know we give a lot of rental assistance to people still. Our governor returned $400 million in rental assistance. So a lot of people are still in need of those safety nets because they are still impacted by health issues, COVID, and the new strains of the flu. So it's putting burdens on their family budgets. So that's why I think we see the differences than in the general election to now, because it has become more pronounced. And I'll turn it over to Deb so she can take it home.
So I think everything that everyone said is so right, but we have to also remember that Atlanta is one of the most unequal cities in the United States of all big cities, and the impact of the 60% of the population that lives in the metro area is felt throughout the state. So if you can't afford to live in Atlanta, to Felicia's point, people are moving outside the inner core. So those poverty issues and lack of infrastructure around the state, lack of hospitals, lack of healthcare, lack of even economic opportunities is felt throughout the entire region. So what we do see, it to the point of people being educated, it took organizing on the ground and organizations on the ground to build this infrastructure over years to get the people out. So it wasn't just magically that they saw that there was this need and they came and rushed to, save America. They were trying to save themselves. And so as the organizations on the ground, we are the midwives to that, right? So we're trying to get our folks educated in a way that they know why they have to turn out. People couldn't understand why the race was what it was, but we understood as activists on the ground that you have to educate your folks and you have to dispel the miseducation that's online and that's in the media, that we understand that there's a reverse migration going on in the South and people want to move back to the South because of the weather and some of the economy if you have education, to the point of those who are more educated in the South do much better. So we know that the demographic shift is happening with Black and brown people, but we also know that this is not a magic formula. This happened because organizations on the ground, many on this phone, on this Zoom, have been building the base for 10, 15 years so that when we're calling, they trust us. When we're knocking on the door, they know the people's agenda. They know Clayton County. They know to turn out. But that's what is needed, is those ambassadors to say, we're going to center the voter and not the candidate.
Thank you. Thank you. Liv, what do you think?
Good morning, everyone. I agree with absolutely everything that everyone has said so far. With the focus, with my position, I was able to focus on Black youth across Georgia. We knew that we weren't going to be everywhere on November 8th and December 6th to be there to encourage each person to go vote. So what we did to work around that was we did a lot of activations across Georgia, specifically the Black Youth Renaissance Tour, which was a coalition of grassroots organizations like Georgia Stand Up and Black Voters Matter, NCBCP. And we gave the students the tools. We gave young voters the tools and the education, the literature, the voter protection, Lyft rides, put them in connection with local organizations that they can call on if we're too far away, so that when it does come time to vote, they can. And we saw that in the rural areas in Georgia and even in Metro Atlanta, that the students in the demographics of 18 to 35 did go out to vote. And it was all about putting the power back in the voices of the youth. A lot of them were discouraged. Surprisingly, a lot of the HBCU students were not aware of a lot of the terms, the positions, politics as a whole, and it was very overwhelming and scary. So we broke it down to terms that they understood. We reached out to them in ways that they were receptive to. We brought music that they liked. We brought food they liked. We brought clothing that they liked. We brought artists that they liked. We brought the organizations that they trust on campus to come and work with us to turn them out to vote. And we saw that from this poll. We saw that from both elections. So
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Black youth really helped save the day. And you drove the vote, not just in December, but in the general election in 2020 and 2018. Eventually, the media really will fully catch up to it, but they just really don't get it yet. So y'all just keep leading. Abdul, I know you had lawyers and law students that were on the ground. What when you hear the results of that, and then what your folks report? I know you work with Helen in election protection and all of us, and so tell us what's your feedback to what you heard.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for the tremendous work that you've done over the years, over the decades, to make sure that our communities are able to exercise their voice. We were honored to be part of this movement. Over the course of the last 2 months, we have mobilized some 100 Black lawyers and law students to travel to key battleground states, over 50 of them to Georgia, to make sure that we were not only working to protect the vote, but that we were also working to educate our communities about what is at stake alongside so many of you. In every election, I often say that we encounter two challenges. We encounter voter suppression and we encounter voter depression. And part of what we have to do as organizations, particularly those of us who are committed to the vote as a tool for racial justice, is make sure that we're working on each of those issues. And so what we did was we partnered with Felicia Davis, we partnered with Helen Butler, we partnered with Melanie Campbell, so many of you, to make sure that we were going into Black churches and educating Black voters, going into Black communities, educating Black voters about how to protect their right to vote. So not just encouraging them to vote, but making sure they had the information and the tools and the resources they needed to protect their vote on election day. And also just making sure that we were clear with voters about what is at stake. You know, we often say at Y Block that Gil Scott-Heron said the revolution will not be televised, right? But we argue that it's going to have to be legislated, and it's going to have to be signed into law somewhere. And so part of our message was making sure that Black voters, and particularly young Black voters, understood that that's power that you really don't want to leave on the table. That any revolution we want to see is going to have to go through the ballot, and we have a voice in that process. And one of the things that I'll just say is that, you know, it takes a lot for Black lawyers and law students to get on planes and get on buses and come in to a state, taking time out of their busy weeks and busy weekends to do this work. And I think part of what you saw with our movement is that Black lawyers and law students across the country understand that Georgia is a battleground for Black political power. That if we get it right in Georgia, we have an opportunity to get it right across the country. And so they understood the stakes. And we're just grateful to them. We're grateful to our partners on the ground who helped us make that happen. And we're going to continue to drive this movement forward. One of the things that I think this election taught us, and Deborah Scott and Felicia Davis and so many have hit on this point, is that we can't just do this work at election time. We have to make sure that we're in communities year round, talking to voters year round about how to protect their rights. And I think one of the things that we need to be prepared for in Georgia, we're already hearing some rumblings about what the legislature might do. One of the things we need to be prepared for is that there is always a reaction. There is always a reaction to the expression of Black political power. And we need to make sure that as a coalition, we are prepared for that reaction and that we are in our communities continuing to drive the message home about what is at stake and how voters can make sure they're protecting their right to vote.
Thank you, Abdul. I'm going to pull in Christina Q and Daryl Coles, who are our dynamic duo out of the national office who went down to Georgia. Q, let's start with you. You work very closely with the leaders on this call and all of us, and as a campaign manager, give me your feedback about having been in Georgia, working closely and not trying to not being in the way, but being a part of the way, if you will. How you felt, and you talked to a lot of young people yourself, Daryl, and you all was give us your feedback on what you learned and from being on the ground in Georgia.
Thank you, Melanie. Good morning, everybody. And thank you to all of our fearless leaders on the call that are doing the incredible work. It was just a tremendous honor to just be alongside you all and supporting the work that you're doing on the ground in Georgia. And it was just really amazing to see all the work that you're doing. The party at the polls, I think that is a great example of a model that we need to do like in other states, and even more out, targeting our polling locations that are high traffic polling locations where we do that and get the investment that we need. I think that was just a great allocation of the resources that you all are given. I think, the watch parties that you were doing for election night, Clayton County, where we visited the barbershops, it was just so exciting to see all the work that your organizations are doing on the ground. And I agree with everything that everyone else said on the call. The continued investment is what's going to be key, because we're going to need to educate and inform and empower. And I think the only way to do that, though, is to have that investment early on so that we can do that throughout the year, and that our leaders on this call and in the other states that we support all have the resources they need on the ground to do the amazing work that they do, because they are the experts. They know what to do, but they need to be supported to be able to implement the work that they need to get done. And I think it was also just so powerful to see our Clark Atlanta students who came on election day and volunteered and did the election day monitoring. They were so excited to be a part of it. And they are begging to do anything else with us again whenever we are in town. So it's just exciting to see the next generation of leaders in college that they have questions, they want to learn, and they are eager to be a part of, the movement, and they want to see change, and they want to be the change that they seek. So it was just so great to be there.
I'm sorry, Melanie, would you mind repeating the question? Excuse me.
Hi, Daryl. How you doing?
Give me hey.
Yes.
Hey,
and so, Daryl, I know you were on the ground with us for the runoff, and you engaged on the ground. Just what you felt, what you heard, and what you learned in the process of being on the ground, especially as our Black Youth Vote.
Well, I learned a few lessons. I learned the importance of coalition building and just partnerships and just effective communication from partnering with NCBCP, the National Urban League, Georgia Stand Up. I learned that every organization, literally, every person has a role to play in the liberation and justice for our people. From seeing Georgia Stand Up, being located opposed to the party, as Q was just talking about. They had food trucks lined up for weeks. You had so many different people of ethnicities and different classism there, from middle class to poor, and everybody was just socializing, communicating, and our people, they're starving for this knowledge to see Liv go on campus to different colleges to talk to the students, and they was just receptive to with everything she was saying. It's everything's important. So, and as you were saying, Melody and Abdul, Georgia is clearly ground zero. It has so much political power, chocolate city as they used to call it. So everything just formed. It was history. We was literally living in history. And so as Q was, just to elaborate on Q point, Deborah, Liv, and so many other great leaders, they're the experts. And we just have to do more to support them and give them the tools they need anyway and beforehand. So it's not, so when election cycle does come, our people already have the knowledge or the tools they need. So when the right candidate comes, we all already registered to vote and we get ready to use our power. So I'll forever remember the conversations Deborah, Liv, Abdul when he was in the institution. So thank you for having me, and I learned a lot.
Thank you, Daryl. So we're going to do one fast round with everybody. So what's next? So what do we need to do? Folks turned out. They turned out in Georgia, and they turned out in a whole lot of other states that we worked for the general. So I'm going to just ask, I'm just going to call your name and just quickly just tell us what's next, what you're going to do next. If you want to hone in on your organizations, or what do you think we all should be doing? I'll start. And I'll start to say that the enemy never sleeps, and that all the work that's been done, those same people who tried to stop us are not going anywhere. And so we have to also continue on the federal level to push for federal voting rights reform. We may not get it in one cycle, we might not get it in 2 cycles, but it did not, with all of the excitement of what happened in Georgia and all of the work that all of you all did and others, and we did and helped do that, you still have the reality that come January, you're gonna be looking up and you're gonna have state legislatures looking at how Black people turned out, just like they did in these last elections. Over the last, honestly, especially over the last now 12 years, they look at us, they look at how we vote, they study how we vote, and they go into these state legislatures and they develop laws to try to push us back one more time and push us back, which is I'm glad why Abdul and the lawyers and the law students, and having law students especially who believe in social justice work and not just corporate law, right? Who are willing to get on the ground. The movements have always had to have those connecting points to it for us to win in the streets, win in the legislature, win in the executive branch, win in the courts. All of that is part of the ecosystem for the national coalition and the work that we're going to continue to do going into 2023. Still even now, as we drinking eggnog, and I'm drinking my own, right? Eggnog, we still have to say, hey, y'all got a few more days in the congressional calendar. Congressional Black Caucus is doing what they can to try, may not win, but if you don't put your issues on the table, no matter who's in office, because things can shift. What happened in Georgia in 2020 was a game changer. What just happened in Georgia is another game changer. What happened in Michigan, game changer. They flipped the legislature. It can happen. But like Deborah and Helen and all y'all know, we all know, it takes constant 365 civic engagement, 365 power building, organizing, training, getting some rest in there, right? As a part of what we have to do with the work. So I'm gonna call on you all. I'll start, Helen, because I'm looking at you at the bottom, just go through what's next. And then y'all will promise we'll get you off of this phone, off the Zoom by 11.
Well, what's next for us is a special election on next Tuesday that we still have to go in Augusta, Georgia, which is one of the critical areas of the state that we target. But the critical part is the legislature. I think Abdul mentioned it. There are things that are already planned. So we have to have our own strategies for how we combat it, or how do we be proactive in some of the things that we want to happen in Georgia, whether it's not just for, elections, but it has to do with other issues that are coming up, education funding that is happening for our schools, whether it's healthcare, what's going to happen along those lines, other issues that are important to our communities are what we're going to have to focus on. We're going to be real in the thick of our legal cases that we've already filed that will be coming up to be heard or, deposed with the people that are involved from a redistricting standpoint, as well as our lawsuit with regards to SB 202 itself. But again, you said it, Melanie, we've got to continue to register people 365. We got to organize, but more importantly, we've got to keep educating people about why it's important to be engaged, what those positions do. We did the candidates cards that we couldn't keep in our hand because it had the pictures, but on the backside of that picture, it had what those issues, those positions would impact. And everybody thought those were so great, and they're asking for us to come back again with those. We're going to mobilize. We provided over 700 rides to the polls. So we got to make sure we do that. We knocked on the doors. We don't usually knock on the doors because we're doing election protection and recruiting poll workers and working with our election officials to get them on our side, to help them push some of the changes that we want to see from an election standpoint. But we've got to really get people engaged and continuously engaged and educated as to why these issues are critical and why public policy impacts the issues that affect their everyday lives, whether it's housing. The mayor just appointed a new labor department. How would that impact you as a citizen of the city of Atlanta? Those kinds of things to keep people engaged and motivated to understand that they've got to show up no matter what election is on the table. They got to really have a culture of voting. It's got to be second nature to them. It can't be just when the president is on the ballot or when somebody popular candidate is on the ballot. It's when the Board of Education people are on the ballot. It's when your city council is going to be on the ballot. Next year, we have 530 cities, and we're going to have city council races and mayoral races next year. So we've got to concentrate, but we got to understand that all of those positions are interconnected, and that if you want your lives improved, the money that is dispersed by these political positions, you need to know them and make sure they do what you want and hold them accountable so that your community can thrive. Economic development. We've got to go back to a livable wage, not a minimum wage, a livable wage, which is way above $15 an hour. So those are kinds of issues that people have to understand that elected officials impacted. And if you want to be your lives to improve, you got to be engaged and can't let other people take your power away. Because when you do let other people vote, they taking your power and using it for their benefit.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Helen. Deborah, and then Liv, and then Felicia, and then we'll do one round with our national partners and our team.
Great. So I'm glad all the things that Helen said, are all necessary in what we're going to do. Part of what we're doing now is we have engaged a tremendous amount of young people throughout the state, and whether they were organizers on the ground or working with the student program. And so, unlike other campaigns where you can just throw the stuff in the trash and go on and move on, we now have this collection of people that we have seeded into for a year. And so we can't let them go. So we're figuring out what to do and how to cultivate the leadership of these young folks and put checks in their hands. So we're trying to merge them into some of the other programming we do at Georgia Stand Up because it's necessary for them to stay engaged. We don't want to stop these campaigns, fold everything up, and then have to restart next year. We have to keep it going, which means we have to think about we pay our people. How do we, keep payrolls going even in the off season? Because we can't keep doing these miracles to the sense of all these nonprofits on the ground without an investment into these organizations. So we're going to keep trying to get the word out about what's necessary to build infrastructure in these states. People want to come and find out what the secret sauce, but the secret sauce really is about power. It's about understanding that the power really rests with the voter, but we need resources to be able to get to those voters, to dismantle some of the misinformation, to get them at the Capitol so that they can fight for voter ID, so that they can fight for Medicaid expansion. So we have to take our electorate, get them educated, and get them activated so we can keep rinsing and repeating and doing it again and building the power structure that is only just begun here in Georgia and will go throughout the rest of the South.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb. Liv, anything you want to add?
Oh, Ms. Scott just said literally everything. But I 100% agree with everything she said, and being able to work directly in the work and then see the outcome. Not even just that, but some of the greatest takeaways from this election season alone were being able to have the conversations with young voters and see that they are eager to want to get to know and get in contact with organizations like the ones on this call. It just goes to show that now it is our duty. We've asked them to go vote. We've pushed them. It's time for us to support them, their communities, their schools. Some things were exposed this year that some people didn't know. HBCU students cannot vote. Cannot vote without a valid ID. And a lot of HBCU students are not from Georgia, that live in Georgia for school. So taking on issues like that in the upcoming year and bringing that to light and mobilizing students, to get on those issues and understand that those issues directly affect them and can be changed because Black youth have the power. But I think it is everyone's responsibility to continue the investment that everyone has started in the youth and in these communities. They're eager, so it's time to figure out the best ways to reach these communities and to continue the work.
Thank you, Liv. Felicia.
So I'm going to go just a little bit different direction, because on the ground, we did encounter the misinformation in two big ways. One, credit is given in odd ways to who accomplishes what. And there's a disconnect with voting and the positive things that are accomplished. So from my end, especially looking in Clayton County, we have to do a much better job of connecting the dots and taking credit for the successes that we have along the way. So as organizers, we spend a lot of our time trying to push people to next. And we run where we're losing with the misinformation is all these negative things. They're not true. So we found, especially a lot of the young men we had working, were spending a lot of time educating their brothers about what's really going on, who's really doing what, and what's happening on the ground and how their vote can matter. Because there was a sense in the community, well, we voted before and nothing has changed. And the credit given for things from COVID to small business to investment, it's really misinformation is out there that pits the women against men, the community against other people of color communities. That is alive, and we don't pay as much attention to that because we're busy trying to register people, inform people, get them to exercise their right. And so we haven't, I think, sufficiently tackled this body of misinformation that is strategically targeting our community. And it is making inroads in our community. So as we go forward, in 2023, elections are local And local elections are perfect opportunities for sharing with people the precise impact that the vote will have on what's going on where they live. So we need to take that opportunity, but in a national way, we need to take credit for our successes, that in fact our young people are voting, in fact our communities are mobilized, and not just the suppression side that we have to also fight, but lift up. So we celebrate.
And that's an amen, you know, and that's the amen, because they don't. A lot of times we organize and we work and we fight, and then we wait for the next fight, and then that in between that fight is to leverage what you did do and know that you are making that it does matter, whether you're talking about voters or organizations. And we spend a lot of time, and I can speak for myself, for the National Coalition, we have to spend more time. Part of why we're doing this conversation, quite honestly, right? Why we're doing this conversation. Yes, we should share data, but people need to hear from you, hear what is happening, know that it does matter, and that you can, when the election is over, then you leverage that vote, that in between that election, all that happens, and give people some joy. What was great about being out there on the streets, and being at the party to polls, and being on the ground in the barbershop in Clayton County, and going over in Southeast, and being at IBE, being the togetherness part, and going out to Stonecrest, where you had a lot of our national organizations come together who don't get a chance to come together. Everybody had their buses doing their thing. We had a moment where our community wants to also see us unified. Part of the challenge for us, and somebody brought it up, I can't remember which one of y'all said it, I think Q may have been you, that our movements have to be funded. They have to be funded 365. Black people, Black women, Black young people, we are driving this vote. We have to educate Black men who are being very much targeted in a way to keep them feeling they don't have power. We heard that, Daryl, earlier on when we were doing those conversations through Black You Vote with the, what y'all call them, Twitter spaces, right? I don't have a political home. I don't see so that's the other part, Felicia, that you brought up, right? And Abdul with the lawyers. We know we got a lot of work to do. I'm going to say thank you to everybody. Abdul, I'll give you, a minute to say anything else that you'd like to say, or why Block is getting ready to do. And we're just going to close this thing out after that. So Abdul, and then we'll have 1 or 2 more words from Daryl and Q, and we're going to wrap this up.
Absolutely. I'll take 30 seconds. If you are a conservative law student, the minute you step onto a law school campus, there are organizations that you can join that will capture your interest and plug you into conservative efforts on the ground to roll back voting rights, to roll back civil rights, to roll back women's rights. And there is no Black-led counterweight that is civil rights focused to that. It just doesn't exist until we came along. And that is our vision. Our vision is to make sure that when a Black law student who cares about civil rights, who cares about voting rights, who cares about our community, steps onto the law school campus, they have a platform through YBlock to plug into organizations like Georgia Stand Up, like HBCU Green Fund, like the Georgia Coalition, and like the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, to really harness their legal talents and harness their legal skills in support of our communities. And so that's what we're going to be building over the course of the next several months and several years and into perpetuity, is to make sure that we can produce the next generation of Thurgood Marshalls and Constance Baker Motleys and Marian Wright Edelmans, right, who are plugged into our communities, who are not just doing the corporate work, but who are connected to the grassroots organizing work that really builds power for our communities. We are behind as a movement in that work. And our goal as an organization is to catch us up and move us forward to make sure that we have a legal army that is prepared for the next generation of fights.
Well, thank you, Abdul. And we met all of those folks. It was just the energy not just, you know, the difference. You know, you really know the difference. And so for us at the National Coalition, we were going to continue, as we always in the Black Women's Roundtable, and continue to fight to make sure that, one, that we find ways to constantly tell the stories, to lift up leadership that's doing the work every day. That's part of what coalition means, right? And the other part with our institute at Clark Atlanta, that we will be having fellowships and internships, not just for students in Georgia, but across the South in the next school term, that we could continue to work with those students, work with the political science departments and others to utilize the Institute as a place for folks to come to and gather and be able to have some long-term thinking around building and sustaining and protecting Black political power in this country for generations that don't even know yet what it means for their lifelong living. And so that's part of what we will continue to do. We have our Black Women's Roundtable National Women of Power National Summit coming up in March. We will be on the ground. Like I said, we're gonna take a little time, drink a little eggnog if you drink it or not. You know, it could be non-alcoholic or whatever, or spirits in it, whatever. Because part of the movement is to take care of ourselves and have a respite for these next few weeks, and then back on the ground in January. So Q and Daryl, I'm going to say to you all, we're going to close this out, and we will be having a convening in Georgia very, very soon. I want to thank Q, Daryl, Avis, Abdul, Liv, Deborah, Felicia, Helen, our back end team, Angelo and Antoinette, Roland Martin, Unfiltered, for bringing us this opportunity once again. And hey, we say, let's do it again. We got power to the polls. We got, what was your theme, Deborah? When
we vote,
we vote, we win. Any other, right? All of that.
Ballot.
All of that.
Power of the
Power of
ballot.
the ballot.
Black ballots, Black futures.
All right. Did I miss one? Right.
when our rights are under attack, what do we do, Liv?
Stand up, fight back.
Stand up, fight back.
So we're going to continue to stand up, fight back. And I'm Melanie Campbell. We thank you for being here with us all year long. We're going to take a little break, but we will be right back in January 2023. Have a happy holiday. Merry Christmas. Happy Kwanzaa. Happy New Year. Happy, if I miss anything.
Happy
Hanukkah.
Reiner is
Right.
home.
Happy Kwanzaa.
Happy Kwanzaa.
Happy Kwanzaa. And love everybody. And we'll see you in the new year. Be safe. And God bless.
Bye.
God bless everybody.